Okay, we're back again. We're going to be looking at Daniel chapter 7 tonight. I wasn't sure what to title this. It could be Times of the Gentiles. I decided to go with the four beasts because that seems to be the predominant thought here in this chapter. So, beginning in this chapter, chapter 7, we leave behind all the historical information about what was going on during Daniel's time, and we enter into the apocalyptic or the prophetic part, what's coming in the future as he's looking at it. And for Daniel, it's kind of like he's flying in a helicopter over a parade. He can see the end of the parade. He can see the part of the parade he's flying over. He can look out the front windshield of the helicopter and see the start of the parade. So he's seeing this whole thing from the first of the great beast, Babylon, to the last, the second Rome. And a lot of people wonder, well, why only those four empires? I don't understand. Well, these are major empires that had a significant impact on Israel. Everything in the Bible pertains to Israel. Israel is in the center of the earth. God calls it his belly button. Uh, it's the belly button of the earth, and so that's what we're dealing with. Everything that we look at deals with how it relates to Israel. So in Daniel, if we wanted to go in sequence, this chapter would come before chapters 5 and 6. And then we would do 7 and 5 and 6, and then we would jump to chapter 8, which is what we'll be looking at next week. As we go through this chapter today, verse 2 through 6 are going to deal with those first three beasts. Verse 7 to 12, the fourth beast. And then verses 13 and 14, the Ancient of Days. So in Daniel 7, verse 1, in the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, which would have been 553 BC, Daniel had a dream and visions of his head while on his bed. Then he wrote down the dream, telling the main facts. So Harvard, the A&E channel, the History Channel, they really should read this verse because it says here, I, Daniel, wrote the book of Daniel. And Jesus quoted this passage as being from Daniel. So all of these colleges and all of these TV stations stuff, all try to say that it couldn't have been written by Daniel because he couldn't possibly have known all this stuff in advance. Well, he didn't. God did. And just as a note, I never seem to remember my dreams here. Daniel writes his dreams down. Here, Daniel is writing it down. I guess that's why I'm not a prophet. I started a nonprofit ministry. We studied the death of Belshazzar recently. He died at the hands of the Medes and Persians after the handwriting on the wall episode. And now Daniel goes back to tell us about a dream he had back a little before that time. So in verse 2, Daniel spoke, saying, I saw in my vision by night, and behold, the four winds, which is Ruach in Hebrew, it means the spirit. So the four winds of heaven, the spirit of heaven, and that typically refers to the four directions, the four winds, the four directions, north, south, east, and west. Not that we are a flat earth. But the winds were stirring up on the great sea. Now, a lot of people, commentaries I read referred to this as the Mediterranean. There are only four seas mentioned in Scripture: Galilee, the Red, the Dead, and the Med. And so a lot of people just assume he's talking about the Mediterranean Sea, since that's Israel's sea, if you will. But it could and probably does refer to the mass of humanity. And we've seen that in other places, as I'll show you. And four great beasts, which are kingdoms, came up from what? The sea. So I believe that's what it's talking about here. He has stirred up these four empires. And four great beasts came up from the sea, each different from the other. The first was like a lion and had eagle's wings. I watched till its wings were plucked off, and it was lifted up from the earth and made to stand on 2 feet like a man, and a man's heart was given to it. And suddenly another beast, a second like a bear. It was raised up on one side and had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. And they said thus to it, Arise, devour much flesh. And after this I looked, and there was another like a leopard, which had on its back 4 wings of a bird. The beast also had 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. After this I saw in the night visions, and behold, a fourth beast. This was dreadful and terrible, exceedingly strong. It had huge iron teeth. It was devouring, breaking in pieces, trampling the residue with its feet. It was different from all the other beasts that were before it, and it had 10 horns. I was considering the horns, and there was another horn, a little one, coming up among them, before whom 3 of the first horns were plucked out by the roots. And there in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man. Interesting, he says like, not that they were, and a mouth speaking pompous words. So see, as I said, according to Revelation 17, verse 1 and verses 15 and 16 of that chapter, Lord said, And he saith unto me, The waters, the sea, which thou saw, where the whore of Babylon sits, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. In other words, the Gentile nations. So I really believe that's what this passage is referring to. Let's just consider the beast. We've looked at him once before on Nebuchadnezzar's statue. His statue had a kingdom that was of gold, another silver, then bronze, then iron mixed with clay. These wild beasts are the exact same nations, countries, the same truths, but they're 2 different images. Why? Well, Nebuchadnezzar saw it from a worldly perspective, from the Gentile perspective. Daniel now is getting this vision, not Nebuchadnezzar, and he's seeing it through God's perspective, the Hebrew perspective. Nebuchadnezzar sees beautiful, glorious, powerful nations. God sees them as grotesque beasts. And with what perspective do we look at history and current day events? How do we see what's going on around us? Through man's perspective or God's perspective? Do we look at the news and try to fit scripture into it? Or do we take scripture and then see how the current news fits into the Bible, into prophecy? It really makes a big difference. If we use the news to determine what the Bible means, we're going to get into all kinds of trouble. If we understand our Bible, then we can look at what's happening around us every day, and it begins to make sense, particularly in these days. We're seeing everything we've been told in Daniel and Revelation and the prophecies, the Old Testament prophecies, all coming to pass right now. So everything is fitting into place. Like Samuel in 1 Samuel 16, he's inspecting Jesse's sons, looking for the next king. And every son looked good to Samuel. God was looking for David, who was out in the field with the sheep. So it depends where we're looking and how we're looking. So if we look at these beasts, the first one is Nebi and Babylon. His kingdom or empire lasted 88 years. The head was of gold. It was like a lion, meaning king of beasts. It had eagle's wings, like birds of prey. Archaeology has found in the old gates of Babylon examples of lions with wings on them, on their gates, on some of their statues in different buildings. It's also mentioned in Jeremiah 4, verse 7 and 13, and also Ezekiel 17:3. And there are a lot of other references, but if you want to look at a couple just to be Bereans and make sure I'm telling you the truth. Saddam Hussein, you remember him before he got hung up, was rebuilding Babylon using these same symbols. He was putting the lion with eagle's wings on the buildings he was building right there in Iraq today, in the very same area where Babylon existed. So God used Babylon to take Israel into captivity. And then it says the wings were plucked off, referencing a loss of power. Nebuchadnezzar lost his power. He lost his mind. He was put out to pasture like an ox eating grass. He was humbled. He went insane. Then at 7 years, he looked up to the heavens. He received a new mind and a new heart. I really believe that means he got saved. And we'll get to see Nebuchadnezzar in heaven. I hope so. He'd be a really interesting guy to talk to. Then the second beast comes up immediately. And this one we know refers to the Medes and the Persians, which an empire that lasted 208 years. The arms and the chest of silver. It was like a bear. 3 ribs were in its mouth. It was raised up on one side. And we looked at this before. A bear is slow and lumbering, but extremely powerful, brute strength. That's a picture of the Medes and the Persians under Xerxes, who attacked Greece while Alexander the Great, during that time, his father's time. They came with an army of 2.5 million people. I mean, they were just like a bear, just brute strength. There was no way to fight them, 2.5 million troops. It talks about a bear on one side or leaning to one side. That refers to the unbalanced kingdom, the Medes and Persians. They were an uneven coalition. The Persians were much stronger than the Medes and eventually ran that whole operation. And we'll see this a little bit later when we get to Daniel 8. The 3 ribs in the bear's mouth would appear to be, because if you go back in history, you find out that 3 nations joined up to come against the Medes and Persians and were conquered: Babylon, Egypt, and Lydia. They all came against the Mede Persians and were destroyed by them. You can read some of that story in Isaiah 13. Now, God used Persia. Remember, it was renamed Iran in 1975. So we only know it as Iran today. But as I was growing up, I remember the Shah of Iran being run out of office and escaping with his life, and the Ayatollahs taking over. Well, God uses Persia to send Israel back to their promised land. In Isaiah 44 and 45, we looked at this recently. God even named the Persian leader that he would use, Cyrus, by name, 200 years before it happened. So we know exactly who these kingdoms are, and we're going to be told who they are later on in this chapter. But Iran became Muslim controlled. And what has that done? It has set it up for the end time prophecies. Think Ezekiel 38 and 39. Cyrus, the Persian, the Iranian, sent Israel back to their homeland to rebuild it because he saw that his name was in God's Bible. And yet Iran has to be part of the coalition that comes against Israel in the end times. So it went from being a friend of Israel for hundreds of years, maybe 1,000, to becoming a Muslim empire that hates Israel, which had to be the case because they are going to be coming here in Ezekiel 38 and 39 pretty soon with Russia and Turkey and Sudan and Libya. So when you read these things, it's clear God was and is in control. Nebuchadnezzar may have been in control in Babylon and Cyrus and Darius in the Mede-Persian Empire, but it was God who's controlling everything. He knows who these people are. He knows their names before they ever existed. and he knows what they're going to do and how they're going to live. And so he uses them to bring his plan to pass. Now, interesting note for me in 1 Samuel 17:34, David said to King Saul, your servant used to keep his father's sheep. And when a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, and he goes on how he beat it with his rod. It's just interesting that King David refers to lions and bears. And here we have both of them here in this passage. Now, the third beast refers to the Greeks. Their empire lasted 300 years. They had belly and thighs of bronze. They were like a leopard, meaning they were agile, swift, fast. Alexander the Great is who's being described here. He had an army of only 35,000 troops, yet he would go after the Medes and Persians with 2.5 million troops. I mean, it's just absolutely stunning. And he defeated 1 million Mede-Persian troops to overtake them. Now, this period, we're looking at this third beast, Alexander the Great's time, took place during the silent days of Scripture. In other words, this is what occurred between the end of the Old Testament, the beginning of the New Testament. This was all going on in that empty space in your Bible. The 4 wings would indicate it's very fast. The 4 heads always refers to strength or leadership. And when Alexander the Great died, he left his kingdom to the strong. The strong turned out to be his 4 generals, Cassander, who took over Europe, Lysimachus, which took over Asia Minor, Seleucus, who took over Babylon, Assyria, and Syria, and Ptolemy, who took over Egypt and parts of Africa. Now, Alexander died at a young age, around 33. He was depressed because there was nothing left to conquer. He had started at 26 years of age when his father died, and he went 7 years and conquered the entire known world. Being as young as he was and out fighting all those years, he didn't have any descendants, at least that I could find in the history I looked at. So how could Daniel have known that? I mean, just think about it. How could Daniel know all of these facts? And we'll see more of these generals in future chapters. They play a big part. We'll see one of them here later in this chapter. So how did Alexander die? Well, like everything else, there's a lot of different stories. Some people say he got drunk. He wandered out in a heavy rain on the way back to his tent or his personal quarters there with his army. He got pneumonia and died. Others say he contracted a sexually transmitted disease. Others say he was assassinated by poisoning. Who knows for sure? It's too far back and the records are not clear. There's a lot of people who are typically believed that have differing opinions, including people like Josephus. So why this is important, because I mentioned I can't even say it, Seleucus, I believe, took Babylon, Asia, and Syria, the promised land. And from Seleucus comes Antiochus Epiphanes IV. And he is a forerunner of the Antichrist. He's the one we read about who desecrated the temple the very first time. He's a sign or a shadow of what's to come. So Antiochus Epiphanes is a picture of the Antichrist who's coming. The accuracy of the Bible is amazing. Now, a 4th beast, Rome, comes in, and they last 500 years as a single entity, but a total of 1,484 years if you just look at the eastern portion. So when did it split? Somewhere around 395 AD, where Rome maintained the western part of Rome, the Roman Empire, and Constantinople took over the eastern part. This is the Iron Tooth Beast. It was the iron rule of Rome. The iron legs on Nebuchadnezzar's statue. And like the legs are the longest part of the body, Rome lasted longer than any of the four nations. And actually has never ended. It imploded, and Rome in Italy is still there. Roman Catholic Church is everywhere around the world. Then it tells us it also had 10 horns. Remember Nebuchadnezzar's dream, it had 10 toes. And we talked about that being the 10 coming kings in Revelation. It crushed its conquests where the previous three blended in the cultures and the customs of the people it conquered into their nation. So we'll see that as actually spelled out here later in this chapter. So God's time clock for Israel stopped when Rome scattered Israel to the four winds. Again, we see God using one of these ungodly empires to accomplish his purposes. They disobeyed him again after the Babylon captivity, so he allowed Rome to come in and scattered them throughout the earth. Changed their name from Israel under the Roman Empire emperor Herodias, changed the name to Palestine as an insult to the Jews, so the name of the Israel would never be remembered. And Palestine in the Latin, transliteration of Philistines that we know in the Greek language or in the Old Testament. They came from the Greek islands. So we see these here, they're scattered, and then God restarts his time clock when he brings Israel back into the land on May 14th, 1948. So he uses the United Nations and primarily the driving force of Harry Truman, our president at the time, who gave the go-ahead for this to take place. So on the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw of the big statue of the man with the two legs, there is a gap between the two legs. A gap is this time period between the Old Testament and the New Testament, and between these two Roman empires, the Western and the Eastern portions of the empire. And what happens there, again, we see the mystery of the church. It's a mystery. There's just a missing period. And that's what we're living in right now. We're living in this missing period that we'll look at in Daniel's 70 weeks soon. It's that last week. There's 2,000 years between week 69 and week 70. That's the church age. So we get a picture of it in this statue of Nebuchadnezzar as well. Now, Daniel, he can't even think of a beast that looks like this. It's one of a kind. He couldn't come up with any kind of an animal that would describe what this Roman Empire is going to be like when it comes back into power. So what do we see? God uses Rome to disperse the Jews according to his prophecy. He uses the Roman act of crucifixion to fulfill prophecy with Jesus on the cross. The crucifixion, the practice was actually started by the Assyrians in Nineveh. That's the very reason Jonah headed for Tarshish when God told him to go to Nineveh to preach the gospel. He wanted nothing to do with them. They were maybe the most violent, most vicious animals on the planet, doing things maybe even worse than what happened with Hamas and Israel here recently. They would skin people alive. It was horrendous, the things they did. They drove poles threw their rear end out the top of their head and stood them up on the sides of the roads. I mean, it was horrible. But God uses these different emperors and empires to accomplish his purposes. He knows what they are, and they're all punished in due time. In 70 AD, the Romans actually cut the wombs out of the women to prevent them of giving birth. It sounds a lot like what we just saw with Hamas in Israel. It's just, what's gone around is going to come back around again. History repeats itself. During their days, these kingdoms were thought to go on forever. Each one of these kingdoms thought they were it. They were the final deal. They'd be there forever. I think it's much like we've thought of the United States all the years growing up. You just feel like, well, the United States is going to be here forever. We're always going to be the world power. But nothing goes on except eternity. And we're watching the United States collapse, just like Rome did. Rome, the fourth beast. We're collapsing the exact same way. But we don't have that influence with Israel over them like Rome did, for example. So when you look at this, Nebuchadnezzar saw metals, Daniel saw beasts. Daniel saw the kingdoms looking forward in the future. The Apostle John, when he looks at them in Revelation 13, he's looking at them in the past. He's living in the days of Rome. He's looking back at Nebuchadnezzar and Alex the Great and the Mede Persians and so on and so forth. So Rome was actually happening in John's time. So you can see them both looking in opposite directions. This vision matches what we see in Rev 13. So Nebuchadnezzar, Daniel, and John all see the exact same vision. Two of them are looking one direction, one of them is looking the other direction. Now in Isaiah 46, 9 and 10, remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God. There is none like me. I declare the end from the beginning, and from ancient times, things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure. He sees the beginning from the end. He tells us about the beginning, and he tells us what's going to happen in the end. And so far, he's batting 1,000. He hasn't missed yet on any of the prior to this time prophecies. And we're seeing everything lining up for the end time prophecies. The Ezekiel war, the destruction of Damascus in Isaiah 17, an attack on the weapon of Iran, which is the Bashir nuclear facility. We're seeing all of these things. The Psalm 83, I believe, is a prophecy. I don't believe it's the nations mentioned. I believe it's the Iranian proxies that are in each one of those nations. But we have all of these things all falling right into place right now. Now, in Daniel chapter 11, which is a few weeks down the road, there are 35 verses that have 135 fulfilled and documented prophecies. That's just staggering. 135 predictions of the future in 35 verses. Every one has happened. And it raises the interest of the critics. I mean, they just can't say, Daniel couldn't have written this. So you're going, well, help me here. I don't see how this is a problem. You would think this would illustrate, but that God knows what he's talking about. But let me illustrate. Dr. Cressy Morrison said, as a great illustration from the New York Academy of Sciences, he said, suppose I had in my pocket 10 pennies and I marked one of them 1 through 10. Each one was numbered 1 through 10. Then with my hands out of my pocket, I made a prediction and I said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to awe you right now. I'm going to reach into my pocket. I'm going to pull out penny that's pre-marked number 1. So if I were to put in my hand and pull out penny number 1 and show it to you, what are the chances of me doing that? Well, that'd be 1 in 10. There's only 10 pennies in my pocket and I pull out one of them. But if I said, okay, now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to reach into my pocket and select with my fingers penny mark number 2, well, then the odds go up exponentially. They increase from 1 in 100. And then if I could pull out number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, 10, all the way up to in sequence, my odds are 1 in 100 billion. So let's just say I did that and I awed you all. You might clap and be awed, and the majority of you would say something's up, right? Something's going on here. The game's fixed. There's no way that could possibly happen naturally. And that's what people say about these prophecies. The problem we have, because when an unbelieving skeptic approaches the Bible, he approaches the Bible with 2 predispositions. One, that we live in a closed system, and so the miraculous is impossible. And then number 2, since one is true, and things are written about Daniel that actually ended up happening, it must have been written after the fact, not before the fact. It's really not prophecy, it's history that somebody wrote after these things were filled, and they put Daniel's name on it. Well, if somebody had written a book on history of things that happened in the past, they would have put their name on it and gotten the money for the book. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, but this is how they approach it. It helps them dismiss end times kind of things. There being a God who can actually tell you what's going to happen in the future. Well, as we go on, verse 8, I considered the horns, and behold, there came up among them another little horn, before whom there were 3 of the first horns plucked up by the roots. And behold, in this horn were eyes like the eyes of a man, and a mouth speaking great things. Okay, so we see here, we've had 10 horns. I think that refers to this 10 region confederacy, to the elites, that borderless world that we're going to have. We read about that in Revelation 13. May well be the 10 regions that were proposed by the Club of Rome. We discussed that back in the Revelation study. Could the toes of iron and clay that we read about here be pointing to the current Muslims taking over the European nations? That's really something to think about. The 2 cultures, European culture, Muslim cultures, don't mix. You have to read some of the Quran to understand their religious philosophy is that you go to Gentiles, non-believers in the Muslim faith, and you convert them or you kill them. And we see this happening all over Europe. We see some of this going on in our country. I suspect with our open border, we're going to be seeing a whole bunch more of this in the coming weeks and months. But these 10 toes that don't mix may have something to do with these 2 different cultures not mixing. It's a possibility. The little horn, interesting, many people thought Hitler was the little horn. They thought he was a great leader, the guy who could pull the world together. Most of the world's leaders were fooled by him, including ours. Only Winston Churchill saw the truth about him. And as we've read in Revelation, the same thing's going to happen with the Antichrist, this little horn. The Antichrist is going to take control over these 10 kings. The 3 horns that are plucked are going to rebel against the Antichrist and be removed. We can guess what plucked out means. It's not going to be pleasant. Whether it's politically, militarily, I don't know. Either way, they're finished. They will no longer have any authority or power. And we still don't fully understand this part about the horns because it's still in the future. But as we get closer, as we're seeing with all these other prophecies, we're going to see this one start to fall into place. The horn generally refers to power. It says it has eyes, and then it says like a man. At first I thought, okay, well, it's something like eyes, but it's not really eyes because it says it has eyes like a man. But with what's happening today, I read my Bible and then I look at the news Could this be referring to an AI system that controls the Antichrist, a man who sees everything? The Antichrist is called a man in many verses, but we also know that he knows everything. And Satan isn't omniscient. So although Satan indwells him, Satan isn't omniscient. How else could the Antichrist see and know everything that people do? Whether he's transhuman, where he's part human and part AI, that's a possibility. He may be fully human, but he has AI that provides him all the data and information. I don't know how this is going to work, but I'm pretty sure if I try to read my Bible and then take the news and plug it into the Bible, AI makes a whole lot of sense to me now as I look at this. It says a mouth. He, the Antichrist, is always shown talking like Mr. Big Mouth. In Revelation 13, verses 5 and 6, he's going to be a great orator. He's going to be a blasphemer. He can talk the pants off you. I mean, he's going to be one of those people. So who's it going to be? Right? Everybody wants to know who's the Antichrist going to be. Well, I've lived a long time, not as long as some of these people, but many people have been guessing and writing books. They thought it was Nero. They thought it was Caligula, maybe Charlemagne. Oh, no, 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 it was Napoleon. Maybe it's Hitler and Mussolini or Stalin, or it could be FDR. He's changing all the rules here in the country. Or maybe JFK. He's a smooth talker. Or Henry Kissinger, or Sun Myung Moon, or Ronald Reagan, because his name is Ronald Wilson Reagan, and each name is 6 letters. So he's 666. And then you had Clinton and Fidel Castro and Bill Gates and Obama and Santa Claus Schwab, and all the list just goes on and on and on. We don't know. My guess is they've just all been little Antichrist. They've carried that Antichrist spirit. But no one has been right yet. None of us are going to be right guessing at it. And that's because no one's going to know until the rapture occurs. I'm pretty sure this person exists right now. He's in the background. He may be somebody who's a part of the leadership of those 10 kings. It says he rises up of the 10 kings. So he could be like an advisor to them or something. You think of somebody like Yuval Noah Harari, who's the advisor to Klaus Schwab, that kind of a relationship. In chapter 7, here the Antichrist is called the little horn. In the next chapter 8, he's called the king of fierce countenance. In chapter 9, the prince that shall come. In chapter 11, the willful king. In Revelation 13, we saw him called the beast. Jesus called him the abomination that causes desolation. Paul referred to him as the lawless one, the man of sin, the son of perdition. Interesting, he is also referred to as the Assyrian, which would mean an Iraqi. I just find that interesting. An Assyrian, an Iraqi from the area of Babylon. I mean, could the Antichrist be an Assyrian, a modern day Iraqi? It's possible. He could be Iraqi and not be Muslim, in which case Israel might sign a covenant with him, a peace covenant for 7 years to open the tribulation up. Or perhaps, even if he was a Muslim and was willing to guarantee Israel their third temple and peace and security for 7 year in a 7-year covenant, who knows? It's just another one of these prophecies about somebody called the Assyrian that we have to take into account as we're looking at this. Now, here in verse 20, his appearance says he's greater than others. In verse 8 and 20, he has many eyes, which is kind of strange, but would seem to indicate insight or intelligence. Again, maybe AI. He's very clever. He's shrewd. He'll be able to solve all the world's problems. Mr. Fix-It. But let's go back to Rome for a minute. It never disappeared. It collapsed internally. It was attacked by the Franks, the Huns, the Saxons, the Vandals, and not Martha and the Vandellas for any of you oldies, the Visigoths. It existed as two legs, Western and Eastern. Rome was on one side in Italy. Constantinople is in Istanbul today in Turkey. It's on the other side, the Eastern side. And it was interesting, brought back memories to me when I was younger. My dad offered me $5 to point out on the world map if I could show him Constantinople. He'd give me $5 if I could find it. And I searched that map from one side to the other, up and down, from north, south, east, west, the four winds blowing. I couldn't find it nowhere. So no $5. The reason, it changed names. It used to be Constantinople. And now today it's not. So you have those kind of things. So many things change names. Today it's Istanbul. I wasn't looking for an Istanbul. No $5 for me. So in verse 8, 11, 20, 25, we all see indications of pompous words, which he has a big, never stopping mouth. He'll be an incredible orator. Rev 13 says he will speak great things. In 2 Thess 2, it says he'll declare himself to be God. Remember, Satan said he would be like God. And Satan indwells this guy. So we start to see all of these connections. Next, he's going to be an overwhelming oppressor. He's the horn. Verse 21, making war against the saints, the tribulation saints. See that in verse 25. We know he'll kill 2/3 of the Jews in Revelation 13, also in Zechariah chapters 13 and 14. I believe he's the rider on the white horse in Revelation 6 that we saw in the first seal judgment on the white horse. It points to him. He comes with a bow, and bow is interesting as well. A bow can be a weapon, but he doesn't have arrows with it. So perhaps it's talking to this covenant he brings, because a bow is also, to Hebrews, the rainbow, which we're going to look at next time with Noah and his family when they get off the ark. What we do see is in verse 25, his reign of terror is only going to last 3.5 years, 42 months, 1,260 days, very precise. How long is it going to last? 3.5 years. So people who say, it's a post-trib rapture. Well, if it is, then you're going to know the exact day. You're going to know the day he signed a covenant, so you know the whole 7 years. You're going to know the day he sits in the temple and declares himself God. 3.5 days. I mean, there's not a lot of guessing involved there. If you think it happens in the middle, well, you could guess that too. The only way you could not know when it was is if it's before the rapture. But that's for a different argument on a different day. What do we know for sure about the Antichrist? He's going to persecute God's people. Also in Revelation 12 and 20, we see that. In chapter 9, he's going to set up a peace treaty with the Jews and then break it at the 3.5-year mark. In Matthew 24, the Jews are going to recognize it and understand this at that midpoint in the tribulation, and they will flee. And again, I think that they will be fleeing to Petra. That's the only place that seems to fit what it is where they're going and what they're going to be doing. We know that he's coming with a friend, the false prophet, who's going to be a great deceiver. We know that God's going to send great delusion to the people in Romans chapter 1, for example, also in Thessalonians. So it's not going to be hard for these people to deceive the people who are left, because they don't have the Holy Spirit. I mean, the church is gone at this point. This guy's going to arrive on the scene, and the vast majority of the population is going to believe it. And people, I believe, who have been witnessed to here, maybe went to church for a period of time. Maybe they're in church today, in a church that hasn't taught them any of this, or has drag queen hours. And I mean, this whole world, the church has gone absolutely down the tank. It doesn't look at all like the church any longer. And finally, this guy is going to be replaced by Jesus. So from Daniel 7, verse 7, there's a gap of some 2,600 years until a future Rome with the real Antichrist, who's much worse than the first one. Now, we go to verses 9 and 10. I watched till thrones, plural, so there's more than one throne. We know the Father's on the throne because he's mentioned here. It could also be referring to the 24th thrones, but they're not mentioned here specifically because the church isn't sitting on them yet, as Daniel writes this, right? The church isn't there yet. So it could be Jesus hasn't been crucified yet, as Daniel's writing this. The church is a mystery in the Old Testament. It's a mystery to Daniel. So remember, he's looking towards the future. So these thrones could very well be the Father and the 24 elders. Those 24 elders could very well be representatives of the church. It could be 12 apostles and 12 leaders of the tribes of Israel. Again, at this stage of the game, we don't know for sure. A lot of opinions, but everybody's got one. So these thrones are put in place, and the Ancient of Days, we know that's God the Father from Scripture, was seated. His garment was white as snow on the hair, and the hair of his head was like pure wool. So it's not pure wool. His throne was a fiery flame. Its wheels, and we see wheels mentioned in Isaiah and also Ezekiel chapters 1 and 2. Its wheels are like a burning fire. A fiery stream issued and came forth from him. 1,000 thousands ministered to him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The court was seated and the books were open. Right? Order in the court. Here come the judge. Remember Flip Wilson. The books are open. See, this is too late. Like the people in Genesis 7 we looked at, the door on the ark was shut. It's too late now for the people that are coming to be judged that didn't receive the Lord. Not the tribulation saints, but those people in the end times that followed this Antichrist and Satan and the false prophet. It's over. The court is seated. The books are open now. They're at the great white throne judgment. Now, wheels, interesting, it indicates movement on the throne. The only prophets who mention this are the three that were exiled, outside of Israel. So as I read that, what I got out of that is that God's throne goes wherever his people are. When his prophets were out of the country, he went with them. When Noah went into the ark, God went with them. He's always with us. Wherever you go and wherever I go, God goes with us because his Spirit is in us. But considering that, we need to remember that when things aren't going great, that God is right there with us. And in Hebrews 13:5, I'll never leave you or forsake you. But I never looked at it this way before in this context, but every single time I sin, God's right there with me. I brought him into it. Think about that for a minute. The next time you're tempted to say or do something that you shouldn't. God goes with us. His throne is on wheels. We know there's a myriad of angels. We see that again in Revelation 5:11. Then I looked and I heard the voice of many angels around the throne, the living creatures and the elders, and the number of them was 10,000 times 10,000 and thousands of thousands. Where do we just hear that? In Daniel. The stars and the angels are innumerable. So the books are open. Revelation 20, verse 12, the great white throne judgment. The books, plural. What are books, plural? They're the books that contain men's works and deeds. And what is the book, singular, that we read about in Scripture? The Lamb's book of life for believers. So believers and unbelievers' works are going to be judged. For us, the good works will remain. They'll be burned in fire, but the good works will remain. And that's what our rewards will be based on in heaven. For the unbeliever, their works are going to determine the degree and extent of the punishment they will suffer for eternity in hell. So where we're going is decided by whether or not we receive Jesus. How it's going to go for us in either location is based on the works we do. So works matter, they just don't get you to heaven. In Luke 10:20, nevertheless, do not rejoice in this, that the spirits are subject to you, but rather rejoice because your names are written in heaven. That's where we want to be in the Lamb's Book of Life. We want to be sure our name is in the Lamb's Book of Life. Verse 11, I watched then because of the sound of the pompous words which the horn was speaking of the Antichrist. I watched till the beast and the false prophet was slain, and its body destroyed and given to the burning flame, the lake of fire in Revelation 19:20, after the second coming. And as for the rest of the beasts, that's these kingdoms, they had their dominion taken away, yet their lives were prolonged for a season and a time. The great white throne judgment is at the end of the millennium period. So these people will die if they were somehow were believers, like possibly Nebuchadnezzar. He would have gone into the paradise side, and then he'd be in heaven. But people who were ungodly went to the hell side of things, and they're going to be held there to the end of the millennium. Then they will be judged at the final judgment. They'll be tossed into the lake of fire. I mean, it's not real hard figuring out what the sentence is going to be. In Matthew 12:34, you brood of vipers, how can you, being evil, speak good things? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Matthew 12:36, I say to you that for every idle word men may speak, they will give an account of it in the day of judgment. In James 3, this is why God keeps a record of all of our words. And what's coming out of our mouths, our words tell us what's in our hearts. We should pay a lot of attention to what we say because it tells us really where we are in our hearts. Now, like we talked about in Genesis earlier this evening, and now there are people that refer to themselves as annihilists, and they claim that we're just annihilated at the end. Poof, we're gone. You died at the end of time. Poof, you're gone. So there's no eternity. And that makes facing the end so much easier for them, right? There's no need to worry about sinning or not sinning. When it's over, it's over. Poof, you're gone, and no biggie. Or to worry about witnessing to people. Why bother witnessing to our friends? They're just going to be, blown up and they'll be gone. And so they're not going to be suffering. But this is not what the Lord tells us. After the 1,000-year millennium, the Antichrist and the false prophet, who are thrown into the lake of fire at the end of the tribulation, are still there in the lake of fire when Satan gets tossed in at the end of the millennium. So they didn't go poof like Puff the Magic Dragon. They've been in hell for 1,000 years in the lake of fire, burning. And now Satan's joining them. They didn't get annihilated, and nobody else is going to get annihilated. That is nowhere in Scripture. I have no idea how they come up with something like that. Now, it talks about the rest of the beasts. I believe this is talking about the three prior or previous empires, those three cultures of those empires, the Babylonian and the Persian and the Greek. They weren't erased. They were basically swallowed up by their conquerors. So their dominion or their control was taken away, like the passage says. But Babylon, Persia, and Greece continued to live on in Rome, because John is looking back in Revelation. He sees a combination of all four of these beasts. These prior empires would gobble up an empire. Greece would gobble up the Medes and Persians and would incorporate their cultures into the Greek culture. Rome just destroyed your cultures, got rid of all your history, which reminds me of today, got rid of your Bibles or your religious books, got rid of all your statues and things. Again, reminds me of today. And everything became about Rome. You learned Latin, speak as the Romans spoke. There was not going to be any more of living like you did where you were. You're going to become part of us now. So I think John is looking back in Revelation and sees the combination of all of these beasts. I think Daniel is looking forward and is seeing the same thing, just doesn't understand it. So now we get to verse 13 here in Daniel. I was watching in the night visions, and behold, one like the Son of Man. Jesus quotes Daniel 7 in Mark 14. And when he does, he attaches it to a messianic title for himself. When he said it, the Jewish leaders knew exactly what he meant. And you can read about that in Mark 14 or in Matthew 24. He's going to be coming with the clouds of heaven. He came to the Ancient of Days, the Father, and they brought him Jesus near before him. And then to him, Jesus, was given dominion and glory and a kingdom that all peoples, nations, languages should serve him. So finally, we're going to actually have a single government over the world. We're going to have a world situation that's entirely new. Be careful my choice of words. That'll bring peace on the earth. His dominion is going to be an everlasting dominion, which shall not pass away, and his kingdom, the one which shall not be destroyed. So like the Son of Man, because Jesus hasn't come yet, he's the stone that strikes the feet on a statue of Nebuchadnezzar. Can this kingdom be literal? Well, the first four were. Where were they ruled from? And then where will the new kingdom be ruled? We're told in Zechariah 14 that we will rule from Jerusalem and the entire promised land. Will it be eternal? Yes, there'll be 1,000 years of the millennium, and then the earth will be destroyed in fire, and the new heaven, the new earth, excuse me, and the new Jerusalem, we'll see it coming down from heaven. Somehow we'll be transferred to it, and the earth, everything will be destroyed. Now, again, I mentioned earlier, I think Jesus and his bride, the church, is what will replace Adam and Eve on this new earth. Everything's going to be restored. Everybody will be perfect. There will be no sin nature. Like Adam had Eve, Jesus is going to have his bride as his helpmate. Now, in 1854, archaeology proved that Daniel was accurate. If Daniel was written by somebody else at a latter date, then archaeology has lied to us, and the evidence has lied to us, and history has lied to us, and Jesus lied to us. I think I'm going to go with them and not these people that say it wasn't Daniel that wrote this book. And verse 15, what timing? I, Daniel, was grieved in my spirit within my body, and the visions of my head troubled me. I came near to one of those who stood by and asked him, I think this is going to be the angel Gabriel, because Gabriel is the anointed for God and Michael is the protector of Israel. The truth, I want to know the truth with the exact meaning of all of this. So he told me, and he made known to me the interpretation of these things. Those great beasts, which are four kings which arise out of the earth. Okay, we've seen that. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and forever and ever. So that's talking about in the millennium period. The exact meaning interpretation. Again, Daniel's seeing both ends of this thing. He doesn't see the church age. He's not actually seeing the millennium period. He's just seeing on the two ends of this thing. So there's no guesswork needed here. The exact meaning, the exact interpretation. Well, God tells us what this means. In Revelation, I saw there were 26 symbols and 26 definitions of them. So we don't need to figure a whole lot of this out on our own. We can believe God or go to YouTube or the History Channel and see what man thinks it means. There's going to be four empires, well, of these major ones. When the smoke clears, it'll be the saints with Jesus that are in charge. That's the beginning. That's the end. I remembered Marlon Brando in a movie years ago. I Could Have Been Somebody, or I Could Have Been a Contender, I think, in the movie On the Waterfront. You and I someday are going to be somebody in the kingdom based on our works as believers, done with the right motivation. We're told in Luke 16, if we're faithful with a little, he will allow us to be faithful with much. Revelation 5:10, we're going to reign on earth. We will be in charge. We're going to be somebody. Verse 19, then I wished or desired to know more specifically, basically, the truth or the exact meaning about this fourth beast, which is different from all the others, exceedingly dreadful, teeth of iron, nails of bronze, devoured and broken pieces, and trampled the residue with its feet. And then the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up, and before which three fell, namely that horn which had eyes and the mouth and spoke pompous words, whose appearance was greater or extremely good or better looking than his fellows. So he says, then I wish to know, like Jacob when he wrestled with God. Daniel needs some answers here. Tell me more about this fourth beast and the very end of time, the 10 horns and little horn and the three to get plucked. So verse 21, I was watching, and the same horn, the Antichrist, was making war against the tribulation saints and prevailing against them until the Ancient of Days came, and a judgment was made in favor of the saints of the Most High, and the time came for the saints to possess the kingdom. So we know these can't be the church saints. Jesus said the gates of hell would not prevail against the church. So this has to be the tribulation saints. And remember in our Revelation study, we saw that all paints aren't painted with the same brush and out of the same bucket. There are Old Testament saints, there are church saints, tribulation saints, millennium saints, and the New Orleans saints. I'm just kidding on that last one. So why aren't these saints the church? Well, in Daniel 9:24 and Jeremiah 30 verse 7, the tribulation is for Israel, not for the church. Second, in Revelation 4 through 22 chapter, there's no reference to the church in any of those chapters. It's all about the church at the beginning. It's all about us reigning and ruling with God at the end, but there ain't nothing about us in the middle. And 2 Thessalonians 1:10, 5:9, Romans 5:9, Revelation 3:10, and 6:17, the church is promised exemption from God's wrath. In 1 Corinthians 15:51 and 1 Thessalonians 4:15, the rapture is imminent. It could happen at any time. 1 Thessalonians 4:18, the rapture is comfort. He tells us this is what's going to happen at the end. And so share this with people, comfort them with this. Well, if you're telling me I'm going to go through the 7-year tribulation and I should be comforted, I'd be anything but comfort at that point in time. In 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 6 and 7, Antichrist can't come until the Holy Spirit is gone, removed out of the way, and we know he's in the church. 2 Peter 2, verse 5-9, he spared Noah and Lot, just as it's going to be in the days of Noah and Lot. So pre-trib isn't escapism, although I'd be more than happy to own up to, do I want to escape? You betcha. We're going to face trials, John 16:33. We'll face man's wrath, 2 Timothy 3:12. Satan's wrath in Ephesians 6:11 and 12. The world's wrath in John 15, verses 18 and 19. All we're promised is that we will escape God's wrath. So in verse 23, he says, the fourth beast shall be a fourth kingdom on earth. It'll be different from all the other kingdoms. It'll devour the whole earth. In other words, that one world global government. He's going to destroy the whole thing and run it all, trample it and break it in pieces. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will arise, which means they don't currently exist in this form. We looked at this again, I mentioned in the Revelation study, the Club of Rome's plan. Whoever these 10 are, they could exist today, but we do not have this 10 kings type of an empire today. We haven't. The European Union had 10 for a while. Everybody thought that was it as I was growing up in the church, but now they're up to 29 or something, some massive number. Then another is going to rise, which will after them. He'll be different, possibly transhuman, as I said. The first ones shall of the first ones and shall subdue the 3 kings. So we saw that in Revelation 6 and in Rev 13. So the promise of transhumanism is the exact same promise that the serpent gave to Eve in the garden. You can be godlike with intelligence, you'll know everything, and you'll have eternal life. You're surely not going to die. You can become like God and live forever. And that's what we're being promised through this AI transhumanist blending that they want to do with man and computer. Now, in Genesis 3, 4, and 5, serpent said to the woman, you're surely not going to die. God knows that in the day you eat of it, your eyes will be open and you'll be like God, knowing good and evil, intelligence. So there we have it. Some people say, as I was reading that Humpty Dumpty, that rhyme was written by someone describing man trying to revise the Roman Empire. Found that interesting. Now, here are some things to just go a little bit back in history during times when I lived through that. David Rockefeller, the Rockefeller family. These are his words, exact quote. For more than a century, ideological extremists have seized upon well-publicized incidents to attack the Rockefeller family for the inordinate influence they claim we wield over the American politic and economic institutions. Some even believe we're part of a secret cabal working against the best interests of the U.S., characterizing my family and me as internationalist, globalist, and of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global political and economic structure. Exactly what we were talking about. One world, if you will. Those are his words. If that's the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud of it. These are his very own words. So when they say misinformation, and conspiracy theory, this is what the guy wrote. Any questions about these people? This is not a conspiracy theory if the words come out of their own mouth. Like Hitler wrote in Mein Kampf. He was pretty clear on his intentions, but nobody believed him. What about Saddam Hussein telling us his intentions? We didn't believe him. And why aren't we believing Iran today when they say they're going to destroy the little Satan, Israel, and then they're coming after the big Satan, the US? But we're giving them billions and billions of dollars so they can build up these terrorist organizations that turn around firing missiles at our ships in the Red Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. In 1973, in the Humanist Manifesto, Part 2, page 21, in their own words, we deplore the division of humankind on nationalistic grounds, meaning borders. we have reached a turning point in human history where the best option is to transcend the limits of national sovereignty. We don't want sovereign nations any longer, and to move forward toward the building of a world community. A couple of different words, same concept. A system of world law and world order based upon transnational federal government. So a single government overseeing this whole thing. How can they accomplish with this? With the mark in Revelation 13, a surveillance society. Now, in 1970, Zbigniew Brzezinski, who was big in politics at that time around the Nixon era, 53 years ago from me today, back to 1970, he is the father of Mika on MSNBC's Morning Joe. She's married to Joe Scarborough. Here's what he wrote. 1970, listen to the words. Another threat, less overt, but no less basic, confronts liberal democracy. More directly linked to the impact of technology, it involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled and directed society. I mean, they tip us off. They tell us what they want to do before they do it. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, okay? In this case, think Antichrist, think these people who think they're running the show now, the elites, who claim the political power would rest on allegedly superior scientific know-how, think AI, unhindered by the restraints of traditional liberal values. Think the Bible. This elite would not hesitate to achieve its political ends by using the latest modern technologies and techniques for influencing public behavior and keeping society under close surveillance and control. Flat out telling us what it is they want to do. Then in 1978, same guy, 45 years ago, still prior to the internet. Quote, at the same time, the capacity to assert social and political control over the individual will vastly increase. As I have already noted, it will soon be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance. How? AI, the mark, over every citizen, and to maintain up-to-date, complete files, think quantum computers, containing even most personal information about the health or personal behaviors of the citizen. In addition to more customary data, these files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. I don't think they can make it any more clear what their goal has been all of this time. We're seeing it all be put into place. We have Daniel in Revelation telling us what it's going to look like when it hits. And to think that we're not right on the cusp of this happening, I don't know how anybody could miss it. We're there today. We have cameras everywhere. Every post, every text we write, every phone call we make, it's all monitored. It's all recorded. Every Google search. Have you bought anything online? And that night you buy it. And then the next day they say, well, you bought this. How would you like to buy that? I mean, they're monitoring every single thing we do. Kath and I talked about a bedspread months back. And the next day I got articles, advertisements for bedspreads on my computer. We were just talking in the bedroom. So whether listening through the TV, through our computer, through the cell phones that are laying next to us on the end table, they're monitoring everything. So if you bought that, you might want to buy this. I mean, it's clear that they are tracking us. How could this guy have known? Well, maybe he was being driven by Satan. But technology has caught up with the Bible. We were told things were going to happen. There was no way in the world for it to happen. How could the whole world see the two witnesses be raised from the dead in Jerusalem and go to heaven in the book of Revelation, unless we had CNN and the internet? I mean, it couldn't have happened. So for years, everybody said, well, there's no way in the world for any of this to happen. Well, now we know it is. People with their cell phones. So it's the end game here. And I don't know why anybody would be shocked. The United Nations and what they're pushing is just Tower of Babel Part 2. So it sounds like they want to erase our borders. Do we see that happening today? Absolutely. Just flooding through the borders. I think over 6 million people. I think if that number's right, since this administration. Satan has always wanted to be like God, knowing everything, being everywhere, having all power. Technology is right now on the verge of getting him as close as he's ever going to get. And Daniel is seeing all of this 2,500 years in advance of what we're reading on the internet today. It's amazing. These are the signs of the times we're told to look for, and we're living in the times of the signs. We are very, very close to the rapture. Verse 25, try to wrap this up. He shall speak pompous words against the Most High. In Revelation 13, we see that. He shall persecute, or it literally says, wear out the saints of the Most High. He shall intend to change times and law, singular, times plural. Maybe in this case, singular, maybe the Torah, the Bible. Then the tribulation saints shall be given into his hand for a time and times and half a time. So we've seen that before. So when people were asked why they voted for a former president, this happened to be the one who came from Chicago and had no political background whatsoever. They said he sounded presidential, not that he had character or any accomplishments or a resume. And this is going to be the Antichrist on steroids. He's just going to sound president. He sounds like he knows what he's talking about. He'll wear down the saints, not the church, because we're told that can't happen. And the church is still a mystery to Daniel. So these are the people who are getting saved during the tribulation. Daniel writes before the church existed and after the church is removed. So it still remains a mystery to Daniel. Changes in times and law. He will create a world without God. I think that's what this is saying. He'll erase all Christian thought. He'll create a new worldly group of people that will include a new world religion. Perhaps it'll be centered around Noah Harari's new AI Bible, the one that he says has no mistakes. And interesting, we're studying Noah, a man who was righteous in all his ways. And here we have Noah Harari, who's the exact opposite of him. The Bible's already being removed right here in the US and, in our schools, courts, and government. Our history is being removed. Think of all the statues that are being torn down of our founding fathers. Our free speech is disappearing. There's certain things you say, you get eliminated off the internet pretty soon with surveillance. Your cell phone will be gone. You won't have any platform. The right to bear arms, they're cracking down on arms and ammunition, raising the prices unbelievably, so you can't afford to buy ammunition. Literally erased the times and the laws being changed. I think that's what this is talking about with the Antichrist. There won't be any rebellion. And when it talks about the Antichrist, the changing of times, I had a thought. It could be, think of Satan and Antichrist and the false prophet, like the unholy trinity. Antichrist tries to be Jesus of the trio. Did Jesus change the times? Yes, they changed from BC to AD. Did he change the law? Yeah, he changed from the letter of the law to the spirit of the law. Maybe this is what this is pointing to. The Antichrist perhaps will change the times from BC to AD now to maybe AC or whatever initials he would choose to use, and rewrite the laws of God, a brand new Bible. It tells us it doesn't have any errors in it. It tells us the truth because we can't believe the Bible we have. So in verse 26, but the court shall be seated, they shall take away his Antichrist dominion to consume and destroy it forever. Then the kingdom and dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven in the millennium kingdom shall be given to the people, the saints of the Most High, his kingdom. And there's actually going to be seven. I wrote six. There was, in God's eyes, there's Babylon, Medes and Persians, Greeks, Rome 1, Rome 2, the first millennium period, and then the eternal kingdom. So seven, number of perfection. I couldn't figure out why I only had six, and I forgot that eternity is going to be the seventh kingdom. All these dominions shall serve and obey him. This is the end of the account, right? We saw Nebuchadnezzar, the stone hit the statue and took the whole thing down. As for me, Daniel, my thoughts greatly troubled me. Color me shocked, you think? And my countenance changed, but I kept the matter in my heart. So we're past time, I think. So that old Porky Pig line, that's all, folks. All these kingdoms had a shelf life. The eternal kingdom is going to be without end. And I can't wait for it to begin. Now, many people don't believe in God or the Bible. Others see God as some kind of a Santa Claus. He's old and jolly and handing out gifts to everybody, never judgmental. He's always good. We'll all go to heaven, no worries. That isn't what Daniel's telling us. That isn't what Revelation tells us. A day of judgment is coming. There'll be a prosecution without a defense, a judge but no jury, a sentence with no appeal, a punishment with no parole. Can we escape this? Yes, Jesus 5. He who hears my words and believes in him who sent me has everlasting life and shall not come into judgment, but has passed from death to life. So if we know Jesus, K-N-O-W, will be good. If know Jesus, N-O Jesus, then it's the lake of fire. So we all go through life wanting things to be fair. At the final judgment, fair is finally going to happen. Satan, the Antichrist, the false prophet, all going in the lake of fire. All these ungodly people who have done so much and are doing so much damage to mankind, they're going to be judged and they're going to be condemned. No retrials, no taking it to a higher court. They'll be done. So one last thought I had, Zechariah 11:17. It says, woe to the worthless shepherd, we know that's the Antichrist, who leaves the flock. A sword shall be against his arm and against his right eye. So we've heard this in these end time prophecies. His arm shall completely wither and his right eye shall be totally blinded. So I wonder if this could be connected somehow to the mark of the beast, his right arm and his right eye. I mean, just kind of interesting that would be where the wounds are. But whether the Antichrist dies and is resurrected, I don't know. If he's transhuman, that would make all kinds of sense to me today. We know that he's going to be physically impaired after this event, whatever it is. And we'll see more as we study further. Romans 13 gave us more information on this as well. So until next week, try to reach as many people as you can while you can, because we're awfully close and it's going to be horrible for the people that have to go into the tribulation period. So that's it for tonight. Thanks for the prayers. I made it without too much coughing and sniffling. And I'll see you guys next week. God bless. Have a great week.
You too, Rick.
All right. See you, Darn Randy. See you, Greg.
Yep. See you later.